Welcome to Undressing Intimacy, where we cut through the bullshit
Greggy,
so we can get naked.
you can't say that.
Why not? How would you say it then?
Well, maybe more like, welcome to Undressing Intimacy, where we undress emotionally so we can undress physically.
That's exactly what I said. Not sure what the problem is. Welcome
To Undressing Intimacy,
This is
episode number 12.
12. Man, we got a dozen, babe.
Whoop, whoop.
I really enjoy this. I kind of miss it when we don't get to get in here and do this. It's really fun to be with y'all and be able to do this. So appreciate everyone here.
Thanks for joining our conversation.
Absolutely. Hey, wanted to talk about something real quick before we get started. We would love it if you like and subscribe to this podcast, but also I've seen a lack of comments. Not that I'm trying to start a comment war, but if you would put some comments in there, and even if you'd like to add some questions down there that you would like us to talk about, we'll take a look at those comments and we'll read through them and we'll see if we can address any of those questions in future podcasts. So take some time, put in a comment, we'll read it and see what we can do.
Yes, absolutely. We love taking your thoughts, questions, ideas, opinions, and, giving them some time and air and space to noodle on them, think about them, explore them, all the things.
All right, today we're going to get on the edge.
The very cutting edge.
Yes, so hang on to yourselves, buckle in, here we go. We want to talk a little bit about playgrounds.
Adult playgrounds, that is.
Adult playgrounds. Woohoo. That makes
you
me
don't
excited
like
just talking
kid
about
playgrounds.
it. No, in fact, that is a true statement. As a kid, the playground made me sick. I associated with the playground smell. And to this day, if I go to a playground, I do not feel well. So,
But I actually love them.
I know. But our adult playground, I like that one
Yes.
for sure. We're going to talk about what it means to build a playground together as far as what our sexuality looks like and some of the things that we desire. And this is something that's a little scary at times and exciting.
At times.
It's not always scary.
Okay.
Maybe building it is a little scary. And at times we feel intimidated. And this is what's important. As anywhere, when you go into a playground, there's always boundaries, right? So there's fences.
Usually a fence or something to protect or give a limit to where the children can play.
And there's certain equipment on there. There's different things that people like, slides, swings.
Like swings. I love swings.
Yeah, Amy swings forever on the playground. And so,
yes, I'm not a swinger. I like to swing on the playground, yeah. But I am not a swinger.
So there's this concept that we want to talk about building that playground. And a lot of that has to do with fantasy. And I know with me, and I'm with Amy too, and I'll let her talk about it, is that for a long time on our marriage, we misunderstood what fantasy meant. And we had a very bad connotation about it, almost a place where we didn't want to go because it was dangerous.
It was like the slippery slope into the forbidden, almost like if you went down this slippery slope or down this, let's use our playground analogy, down this slide, it would lead you to destruction of self or marriage or relationship.
Right. And the interesting that we actually found out is the lack thereof and not being able to talk about it is really what this slide is, right? So when we hide from ourselves and we don't integrate our sexuality and we're worried about sharing that with our spouse, that's what starts the slippery slope. It takes us to a place you want to go.
That's when sexuality actually becomes dangerous.
Yeah, so it's a crazy thing. It's the one thing that you worry about. It's oftentimes in relationships and in just in your life. The thing that you worry about most and try to control is the thing that usually happens because you make it, you're so tight knit on that and want it not to happen that you make it happen. And so when we're so worried about this thing called play and fantasy, then we actually make it come out sideways and it does get dangerous. But in reality, it really isn't at all. Amy, why don't you explain what fantasy is and why it's important and part of our relationships as adults?
Fantasy is the sexual themes, ideas, images that we can bring forth in our sexuality, the ideas that we find enticing, arousing, erotic. And those are the themes, ideas, images that we bring to create an adult playground. And an adult playground is where two consenting adults, again, consenting, very important, must always have consent, gather. It's a place that a married couple can go together to play, to replenish, to explore the edges. And it's that exploration of the edges that creates this feeling of aliveness. But in order to play, you must first have consent and safety and really a solid understanding that this is play.
Wait, hold up. Let's back up a second.
Yes, sure.
I think there's some people in there that even maybe scratching their head right now and saying, what? You mean the sexual relationship is fun?
Yes.
And it's a place to play?
Yes.
And what are you talking about? I mean, often we find our clients and ourselves too, that this was a misconception, right? Especially for my women folk. I don't want to totally, characterize them that, but
or just lower desire.
Lower desire maybe is a better way of saying it. But for them, really the thought of going to the bedroom in a sexual manner and having fun was foreign. And so maybe you can tell us a little about, I think that was your case for you, right? And if you want to tell us a little about how your mind wrapped around this concept of maybe sex isn't a job. Maybe it's somewhere I can actually go have some fun.
Yes. So in the beginning of our marriage, I was really in the framing or understanding that a good wife serves her husband through sex. And this was something that I had to give. It wasn't for me to enjoy. It wasn't for my pleasure. It was about taking care of, servicing, duty, which honestly is a terrible framework. And in that framework, it is work, it is performance, it is all about reaching an outcome or a goal. And that outcome is usually something like orgasm or making sure that your man is taken care of or your husband. And there is really nothing replenishing or alive. I use the word alive because the root word of eroticism means life-giving or life force or alive. And so there's nothing truly erotic in that. It's actually quite the opposite. And as I experienced in many of our couples, when you are in this duty, servicing, work, performance framework, it does make you feel taken from and dead and less than and diminished. And it does decrease the connection between you. So yes, that is the experience of a lot of couples we meet and our own experience that we came from. And really for me, it was about finding what it was I desired, what I found enticing, what I enjoyed, what themes, ideas, images were enticing to me so that I could bring something to this place. It was about recognizing that what happens in sexuality and between two married consenting people may not look like the rest of your life. For example, I remember the first time you tried to introduce role play and I was like offended. Like, how could you think I would do that? And role play in this context maybe just be like a doctor and patient, right? Like you be the patient, I'll be the doctor, and introducing some novelty and some role play in that. And I thought I would never do that with my doctor. Like, how dare you suggest that? That's so offensive. But now I understand you were bringing a theme and a context for us to play in. And when we're both consenting and understanding that this is a theme and context, what it actually does is allow us to see each other in new light, bring more connection, bring a context that we can play in. And that brings aliveness, that brings replenishing, that allows us to take those edges, the edges of like forbidden and erotic, and play in them with boundaries that are safe. So then it becomes very fulfilling and replenishing. It keeps the monotony and the dullness and some of the deadness or maybe repetition that comes just with everyday life, having to clean and pay bills and cook and work and take care of kids. And not that all of that isn't great, but sometimes it can be very draining. And so as adults, your intimacy, your sexuality can be a place where you go to play outside of all of these contexts that are very structured, that are very controlled, that are very routine, that are very rigid. And you can play in different themes, different ideas, different contexts. That allows a couple to bring their sexuality to a place where they can both play on a playground.
Yeah, very much so. And, it was a surprise to me when one of our good friends at the retreat said this, but I think she said it really, really well. And she said just what you just said, like, I have a lot of chores during the day and I'm tired and I work and I spend a lot of time doing the things I need to do. You better take me in the room and spoil me.
Yeah.
Like, this is my place where I get to do things that I don't do anywhere else.
Yeah.
And I get to let my hair down, literally and figuratively. And I get to allow you to spoil me, and I get to play. I mean, when we were kids, we played all the time. That's how we grew, and that's how we learned, and that's how we discovered, and that's how we
explored,
enjoyed each other, and had fun,
and played in roles too, right?
Yeah, cops and robbers, and didn't mean I wanted to grow up to be a robber,
right? Cowboys and Indians with my brothers. I remember being pirates. I remember playing in the castle and being princesses and princes, and all different kinds of contexts.
Right. Like, so we seem to lose that ability to do that, right? A lot of times when we grow up as adults and it gets put away to the side. But isn't it wonderful you have this relationship, this sexual relationship, where we can bring that back into our lives and we can make that something that we both enjoy. And the problem is with us higher desire folks, and you talked about what happens with the lower desire folks, is that we have no problem thinking of all these fantasies. We can think about them all the time, and we can make them up, and we can play them scene by scene in very details. And that's the way we're wired, right? That's the way that I thought from a very young kid. I remember thinking some of those things. And for a while, I thought there was something definitely wrong with me. We talked about how I thought my sexuality was bad. But the challenge here is that we have them so down to a T that inviting our lower desire spouse or partners in is very difficult. And that's challenging because, one, when we set an expectation of anything, of how we think something's going to happen, it's like dragging that friend to the playground and going, you will go down the slide 5 times and then we'll climb back up the slide and then you'll do the swings.
And you're going to have
fun no matter what I say, because this is what's fun at the playground. And when you say it in that way, it just sounds ridiculous, right?
And human nature is to rebel against that.
And
we
you
all
don't have
want
a choice,
to do our
right?
own thing. Yeah.
I want to do what's fun. And so it causes this contention that we have amongst ourselves because we know, or we think we know, all the wonderful, fun things that we want to do sexually. And I'm sure my spouse, if she would just go down the slide 10 times and climb up them and do the swings, then it would be wonderful. I remember that you had a client that would talk about, like, I have this Ferrari. It's the fastest, sexiest car. And if she would just get in the Ferrari and come with me and speed away, we would have a great time. But she wants to drive her minivan over there. And I keep telling her, like, come get in the Ferrari. I promise you the Ferrari will be fun. And you fought with him for quite a while on this, didn't you?
I did. Not against the desire, but against the expectation. And I think there's a difference there. A desire says, I want to play with you. I want to connect with you. I want to build this adult playground. Here are some of the themes that I see as fun. And you can collaborate in that. The spouse can say, well, that doesn't work for me, but this does. Or how about this? Or, I can be that and you can be that, right? There's room to collaborate. There's room to build an adult playground for 2. There's room for 2 people in that. An expectation is, this is what I want and this is how it will go and this is what I expect you to do and this is the response I expect. It's very, like, the how is very much outlined in an expectation, and usually an expectation just leads to disappointment on both sides because there isn't enough freedom. It's too rigid. There's not enough freedom for both people to be able to play in it. So the desires, yes, wonderful, great, amazing. But when that desire gets moved to the next step of, like, this is exactly how this desire is going to play out, and here's the expectation of it, that's when you've really uninvited your spouse.
Yeah, that's when the choice goes away. And it's interesting because I know this, right? And I've even said in the further podcast, if I can just get the hell out of the way, Amy has all kinds of good ideas that I really like and can blow my mind at many times. But yet I still seem to get in my way. I'll just say, I'll just give you examples. So we were able to get away to Virginia a few weekends ago, and it was fabulous. Mm-hmm. And I'm telling you guys, the sex was great. Don't want to get into too much of it, but I'm gonna, I might be blushing even a little bit.
Yeah,
thinking about
I think you are.
It was fantastic, and even just coming back from that experience and getting back into real life, I've done better at trying to drag Amy in and set expectations of what I think she could do. But I think sometimes we even set expectations on experiences that we had in the past. And so I'm thinking, oh, we should go back to Virginia experience, right? Because that was fantastic. We don't have Virginia time or space, right? And so we can't do that. And so...
Wait, can I just interrupt here?
Yeah.
Because in the past, when we went anywhere, at any point, I knew there was an expectation that I had to meet. And that was so difficult. Like, I wanted to be with you, but in the face of that expectation, it was very difficult to be with you and to collaborate with you because there wasn't room for me. And so even though I would want to get away and be with you, I knew that I would be facing that expectation. And that was always really difficult.
Yeah. So this is completely different.
Yes. So I'm saying this Virginia trip, yes. And many trips that we've taken, there isn't expectation. Right. There is room for both of us. There wasn't like, okay, we're going to arrive and this is going to happen and then this is going to happen and then we're going to do this. There was a desire from both of us to be together, but not an expectation of exactly how that had to look.
Right. And that's what made it so wonderful, right? To tell you the truth. But even I'm just trying to show you the point that even that I've learned that if I put expectations on Amy, that's a killer to the sexual relationship.
It's an erotic killer.
It just goes wah, wah, wah. I still tend to do it not only just with my own, hey, here's my fantasies of things that I think we should do, but here's some things that we've done that were great, and we just need to rinse and repeat because it was so great. And so even setting expectations there is problematic. Mm-hmm. Now, there's something at the very core that makes this work that's most important, and that's trust. If there is not trust amongst each other, then this playground will never get built. I think we mentioned in one of our first or second podcasts that we had a clientele that we used to talk about, hey, you get so turned on and excited to hire a desire person. You're like at the top of the stairs getting ready to barge into the playroom and play on the playground, and your spouse is down on stair number 3.
Or not even on the stairs
at all. Well, this client, she told me, she's like, I can climb the stairs. I'm really good at it. I'll run to the top of it, but I'm scared as hell of what's in that room, right? Because they hadn't gained that trust and hadn't built that playground together and understood where those boundaries were. And so every time she was getting ready to go in there, she's like, what's going to happen next? Am I going to be pushed to do something I don't want to do? Will this not be a collaborative moment? And so really at the core of it is trust.
And I think that trust really looks like you can accept each other's no and be okay.
Right.
You can handle and tolerate that you may have a desire and your spouse doesn't want to engage or collaborate in that desire. They may have a desire and you don't want to engage or collaborate in that. But there is still lots of room in other ways that you can engage and collaborate and be together, and you can handle those differences. Or you might be able to handle, like, this isn't my first choice, but I'm willing to collaborate with you, not out of pressure, but out of like actually choosing.
Right.
So again, not because I think you're going to pout or whine or misbehave or disconnect or withdraw, but because I'm actually choosing to expand myself and lean into, trying something in a different way. And that is still collaborative too.
Yeah. And it's like we talk about in a lot of the other emotional things we deal with is curiosity is always good here, right? And the curiosity I'm talking about is when a partner comes to you and say, I don't think I want to do that. It's always good and eventful to understand why, right? What is around? Not to pressure them or so you can manipulate them, but also understanding the no's around it. I think that's really helped me out is like, well, I'm confused because sometimes you act like you want this toy in the playground, and then you tell me no, and I don't know what it is, and really understanding and being curious about that helps, and being honest on both sides. I don't want it because it doesn't feel good, or I'm worried about it. I don't think it's the right thing to do, or I think it will lead us somewhere we want to go, or I don't think it will be erotic to me, and so I don't want to keep doing this. Whatever it is, being curious and asking about it, but also being honest from the other perspective and not holding back because you're worried about hurting the other person's feelings is going to be important. And it goes back to me learning to grow the heck up and not carrying so much angst about what it meant about me, and realizing it was a collaborative thing in our relationship. And it didn't mean that there was something wrong with me because my ideas were bad or anything like that. It was just, if I would have asked Amy, hey, you want chocolate cake today? And she said, no, I'm good. I wouldn't be like, oh, there's something wrong with me because she didn't like my chocolate cake. It was just like, she didn't want chocolate cake. Okay, let's go on to cheesecake. I don't know. What is it? Let's go on to carrots. That's probably what she would have said. And vegetables and salads. And she'd go, okay, that sounds good. Okay, we can do salad. But in every other part of our relationship in life, we seem to be okay to get this, right? Where it's okay to ask, and then someone says, yeah, I want it or I don't want it. And it doesn't mean something. But in the sexual relationship, for some reason, it puts pressure on us. It means something about us.
It's very personal, we make it personal.
But it is also being chosen, right? I feel most chosen when you're like, hey, let's go build this playground together. Let's try something new and out of the way. That's the places where I feel most chosen. And I think you know that. And so it's not to put the pressure on there, but that's what kind of antes it up a little bit and makes it a little more important than probably everyday choices that we ask each other what we want to do.
Mm-hmm. I think I'm going back to fantasies and adult playground. When I was first learning about fantasy, I'm not someone who naturally has a lot of fantasies. And so this was really a confusing place for me to try and understand how to take ordinary things and move them into this erotic realm and to be able to see them in a different light. And so I have been reading some different books about fantasy and learning that there are all different kinds of fantasies. And a lot of what fantasy centers around is taking something normal and seeing it in an erotic or exciting way, or taking something on the edge of what's like societally okay. So for example, playing with a doctor and a nurse, it's not okay in our social norms for a doctor and a nurse to be having sexual intercourse, but you're playing at the edge of this society's norms. And that doesn't mean that you want that in real life. What you're doing is you're playing with the yin and yang, you're playing with some polarity, you're playing with some a little bit of like this transgressive act. And it's kind of a paradox, because if you allow yourself to play there, then in real life, you'd find that it creates this safe space for that. And then those erotic fantasies or images or themes, contexts, they are used in very positive ways to help build connection, to help create a lot of replenishing, to help create this erotic energy, this vibrancy to your relationship. They become quite a blessing, right? And so it's funny, because if you ignore those things and try and stuff them and don't integrate them, like you said, they come out sideways in damaging and destructive ways. But if you allow them and integrate them, then they become, in this strange way, they become a way for a couple to really connect and keep that vibrancy alive.
Yeah, I think this is really important, and I don't want to push you too much, and I'm not asking you to be too personal about this, but I think it's really important for our lower desire folks to kind of understand what process you went to. Because like you said, you wouldn't even think of a fantasy. Like in the past, I would ask if you had them, and like you would sit there for 15 minutes and like nothing can come to my mind.
Oh yeah.
To a point of could conjure up something, maybe a little bit, to the point now that you can really sit in it and it turns you on, and you allow that to happen. what was the process like to get there? And how can you come from such a place of, I have nothing, to now I can sit and create and be okay with myself and my surroundings, to know that this is something good for me and I can allow this to happen? What went on there?
So many things. I think first I had to just understand that my sexuality was inherently good, and start to accept that, to allow that, to lean into that. Because for so long I had shut it down, I had walled it off, I had guarded against it, I had made it work-based and performance-based towards you. It wasn't really for me, it was really for you. And so first it was about just accepting that in me. And then I feel like as I leaned into that more and more, just little by little, I don't feel like anything happened like suddenly or fast or big ahas. I feel like it's really been a trickle over time. Just getting more comfortable in my sexuality, getting more comfortable in my body, getting more comfortable giving and receiving pleasure, getting more comfortable allowing my mind to notice what is erotic.
Talk about that more. I think that's important. Like, how did that trigger? Like, what did you do? Because before you probably would shut it out, but even how did you get to the point where like, oh, well, that is erotic?
That's a good question. I remember at one point starting to look for different themes in shows or movies or books. Those felt a little safer to me to enter in it before I entered with you, to start and just exploring what were some of those themes that I really enjoyed. Was it romanticism, power play, forbidden, naughtiness, experienced versus inexperienced? And I started to notice which of those themes or contexts, when I didn't mention yet, like really being spoiled, replenished, worshipped. That is one of my favorites. Just noticing like, oh, that sounds kind of fun or enticing, or like, how about that? And then we started to incorporate a little bit more into our dates, into our bedroom. And I feel like it was just gradually getting more and more comfortable internalizing that fantasy was really allowing my imagination and sexuality to meet.
Yeah.
And allowing that to be okay. And it doesn't mean it's an expectation. It means that I can explore and be open and think about ordinary things in extraordinary ways.
Yeah.
And that's really what keeps that like aliveness. When you're like at the edge of something or on the cliff of something, or when you're expanding or exploring, it creates this sense of aliveness.
Yeah, and I think I have a couple things. One, that higher desire we got to be careful of is when that starts happening, not to grab it and take it for ourselves. So I did that several times and would shut that right down, right? Because it was here something finally you were taking ownership of and that you had. And then all of a sudden when I saw a little glimpse of it, I'm like, ah, and I grab it. That's mine. I want to do this. I want to do this. And again, taking control will kill it, right? It will not allow it to grow and explore and be collaborative with each other.
And it is scary at first. So from the lower desire perspective, it takes a lot of courage.
It's that trust, right? I think you always said, and I think from, again, let's talk about it from the female perspective, because I think this is from the female side, not just the lower desire. But you always talked about how you spent your whole life being protective of this.
Yes.
Not only being protective of your sexuality, but also knowing that there were men that were bigger and badder than you, and that if they wanted to take it from you, they could, right? Mm-hmm. And not intentionally, but I think unintentionally, you applied that to men across the board, including myself. I think that's some of the probably most hardest things for me to come to grips with, because I never felt like I ever went there or would go there or would even play in that area. But there is some of that too, right? There's some of that protectiveness that's inherent within you from growing up and having men stare at you, try to grab you, do all the things. They prove to you that if they want it, they're going to take it. And so you had to be very guarded from it, right? Yeah. And then that stepping in was a trust of, hey, if this goes somewhere I don't want it to go,
I can say no and stop it.
Greg is going to stop. And I've always like, yes, that's because on the flip side of it, there's nothing worse from a higher desire perspective or from a husband's perspective to think you took something from the person you love the most. Mm-hmm. There is nothing worse. And that you did something that caused her damage, emotionally, physically, any of the above. Unless you're the jackass out there that does that, and then we're not talking to you. But most men in general have a great desire to take care of their spouses and want to do nothing but not cause harm to them, but enjoy being with them. And so the thought that you have to protect yourself from us is really hard for us to understand. But again, I think it goes back to that underlying trust, of really being able to trust your spouse. And again, this is why the sexual relationship is such a refining thing, right? Because where else do you have to trust one so explicitly,
thoroughly and completely?
Thoroughly? Yeah.
With every part
There's
of
nowhere
you,
else,
emotionally,
right?
mentally, physically, spiritually, financially,
right? And when you can
even
give,
in all the domestic parts of life.
But when in the sexual realm, when you give into that and you show that you can completely trust, and it brings up this great pleasure, because you've gone from maybe I'll dabble into it to, hey, this is something that's very, very pleasurable that you desire, right? Mm-hmm. And that's that refining of, hey, I gave in, I trusted, and look at this wonderful thing that we created together. And there's nothing more collaborative about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I really had to face a lot of fears, a lot of different experiences that I had as a younger person, and challenge beliefs about men and sexuality. And I don't mean to offend any men out there, but I really had to face those and rewrite them and expand the way that not only I integrated it in me, but that I could see this, that sexuality was really a force for goodness, right, when it was used between us. And it needs to have freedom, but also needs to have boundaries. So it's a balance, like that yin and yang. You need both.
The river and the water, the riverbanks and the water, right? It's got to have those boundaries.
It's got to have boundaries.
Or it's damaging. If the water just floods in, it goes anywhere, it floods and creates damage.
And I think there are places and times when sexuality is damaging. And so it is very important to establish first of all, consent, to have boundaries that both of you agree on, to be able to say yes and no, and have that trust between you that you can tolerate those. And also knowing, really getting to know your spouse, and just in so many ways, like as we do our emotional check-in every night, I think that built a lot of trust, just getting to know the inner workings of you even more.
Right.
And as I know the inner workings of you even more, I trust your sexuality even more. I trust the integrity of the way you're going to engage in that. I trust that your Eros energy isn't to get something from me, but it is very much desiring the core of me and desiring to give. And that my Eros energy going towards you is very much about desiring the core of you and giving to you.
Yeah, very, very true. Like,
not in a servicing duty way.
No, it took all those other things to build up to this. Let me say something I think is very, very serious. And I don't think it's offensive to men in general, but there's nothing more heartbreaking than having to work with my clientele and find out when those people that they trusted the most took away from them the most sacred thing. Mm-hmm. And that happens way more than it should. And we just want you to know that we come across that a lot in our clients. We have tools and methods that can help overcome some of that stuff. You know, in serious cases, we know that there's therapy that needs to be involved to do it. But I want to put that underlying there. Just let's lay it out there, right? Yes, there are people who do take advantage of this and take it from people that never do give it to them. And that's the most awful thing in the world. And so it's the opposite of what we're talking about. This is the given freely, and that's what makes it so great. Mm-hmm. Let me go in a little different direction if you're okay with this.
Sure, let's do it.
So we believe that this relationship is a God-given relationship, right?
Yes.
And we want it to be godly.
Yes.
And I think ourselves and many of our listeners out there maybe are a little afraid. Yeah, faith-based,
faithful people.
Yeah, and maybe are a little afraid that this can't be godly. Like God would look down on this, or how can something, when you play with the wrong or temptation or something like that, how can that bring good? What would you say to them?
I think Our faith asks us to expand. Our faith asks us to trust. Our faith asks us to learn how to love deeply, not just at a shallow level. Our faith says, hey, this might be difficult, but let's do it. Let's like kind of step into the dark, into the unknown, because it's for your development.
Right.
And I feel like that's what Eros energy is too. It has this expansive, a little bit of stepping into the unknown, into the dark, but your why is so important.
Right.
You're not doing it to take advantage of someone. You're not doing it to use someone. You're stepping into this Eros energy to learn how to love and give very deeply. And so I think that's why it's so godly. And yes, the form of it, like why is it what it is? I don't know. Sometimes when you think about some of these sexual acts, they're like kind of a little bit weird. But that aside, it's understanding that there is such deep growth and expansion and trust and faith when you step into this realm.
Yeah, like we've been saying all the time, that this is a place that allows you to practice and grow those areas, right? And I think it's just like any other emotional development. You know, early on, we wanted a list of boxes to check of, hey, this was okay to do in the bedroom and this wasn't okay to do in the bedroom because that was safe. And if I could have someone tell me this, then I would be okay. But what I learned and I think we've learned is that is not a way to grow yourself and to take ownership of your own sexuality. It's giving it away to someone else, even if it's a third party that's telling you what's right and wrong. It's taking ownership of learning and growing and desiring. And just as we do emotionally, as we take ownership of ourselves and we step out and we learn who we are, we can actually grow as people. And to me, this sexual relationship and going into this area and playing in this playground accelerates that really fast, right? Because you're faced with it over and over again to understand, okay, what am I okay with? Can I talk to my partner and can we come together and decide what the two of us are okay with? And then can we go there? And when you do and are allowed to take away those boundaries of these third parties making you a checkbox of what you can and can't do, and you go there and you can see what it creates. Like, I'm telling you, like, I've never been closer to God, I think, than when we were truly connected in a
and
sexual
I think
way.
Our faith asks us to create. It asks us to delve into our creative powers. And this is an area that you can definitely create, not only connection and replenishment, but you can also create a lot of imagination and room to play within the bounds that the two of you set.
Right. And I mean, we always look for, I've seen in our retreat, I've seen couples sitting in the room just having their ears cocked on, okay, are they going to give us permission to do something else? Or are they going to give us guidelines that we can't do something else? And to me, that's the place that will hold us back most, right?
You want an outer source to tell you what's right.
It's being able to it's kind of, it's like putting it on them. It's pretty lame, actually, if you think about it. Like, I'm not going to take responsibility for myself at all and what my desires are. I'm going to throw it on someone else. And when you do that, you really can't grow. And we see it all the time. Well, it was us, right? We saw it
we lived it. We kept waiting for this outside source to tell us, yep, this is good, this is bad, you should do this, you should not do that.
Find a book by someone we trust. We tried all the things.
But I think you really have to listen to your inner guide and your inner compass, and each of us has that. And I think a lot of the growth in integrating your sexuality and understanding your eroticism and being able to develop an erotic playground with your spouse requires you to really look at yourself quite deeply, to know yourself quite deeply, and then have the courage to share that and also to love your spouse and who they are and what they love. And so there's a lot of growth and a lot of development. It asks a lot of us to create a very intimate sexual partnership. And so in that asking, it's asking us to grow mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually. And it doesn't have to be all at once. It's always very incremental, but there's like infinite room to create and grow in that.
Right. And if you're just talking about that, we talked a lot about the process that you had to go through to kind of get there. And there definitely was a process on my side as a higher desire. Even though it was easy for me to conjure all these things up and think about them, I'd gotten to a place where I thought it was dangerous and it was a problematic, and I was embarrassed about it, and I was afraid to share. And it really has taken a lot of courage to come out and share these things with you. We had a whole episode about how I was away in Australia, and I would actually admitted that, there was girls walking around without bras, and I saw their boobs, and I thought they were attractive. And I would never had said anything like that from you, because I was worried about what it meant to me, but also hurting you in reaction. And so there is that side from a higher desire person. You ask me, and that I clam up. You're like, there's something in there, Greg. Like, like you've gotten good at like, come on, what are you thinking? And I've like, nope, because like before it was a problem, and I learned from the past that I wouldn't share that with you. So the process on my side was, as you were growing into this, for me to trust you, that I could really tell you what I thought.
Mm-hmm.
And some of those things were things that I may have been embarrassed about in the past or worried about.
It's very scary and vulnerable and exposing to share this innermost part that we don't always completely understand either.
But I've never been more close to you than the times that I've been brave enough to speak up. And it's not me speaking up, it's the way that you're able to take it and understand it. Things, me seeing other girls' boobs in the park didn't mean anything to you, right? It used to mean something about you weren't good enough.
Mm-hmm.
And so it took you being able to not do that too, and that trust of, hey, let's explore why this is and where does this going. And we talked about in the episode, like some of the most erotic emotions I've ever had came out. The poems that we wrote.
Mm-hmm. That was really
right?
fun. And I think that's because you took the energy, the Eros energy, that desire, that arousal, and you directed it towards me.
Right.
You decided where you wanted it to go. And maybe a past version of you wouldn't have made that same choice.
No.
So I think a lot of what really makes our eroticism and our desires become wholesome is the way that they are directed, how we choose to integrate them.
And we don't fear each other's eroticism anymore.
No.
And we did. We feared our own, right?
Yes.
To be honest with you. But I think we got past the fearing our own for me, and Amy feared me, and I feared that she feared me.
Yes.
It was bad, right?
We just had a whole fear thing going on.
There's lots of fear going on, and that's not erotic. And
Nope.
it kills eroticism. So there's a lot of work here that can be done. We love working with our couples to get them to this point. Like I said, I feel like we've talked a lot about the foundations in a relationship that come to this point. And those foundations have to definitely be there, because if you're jumping into the playground and starting to do this in the deep end, you're going to drown. And so really laying that. And that's why we love working with couples, is we can help them see what we didn't see. We can help them from jumping in the deep end without a lifesaver and drowning, which I felt like we did.
Mm-hmm.
And we have some lifesavers out there. We have some scars that we can share with you and help you, if you're stuck in these areas, overcome those areas and help grow that relationship, because ultimately that's what we're looking to do. I mean, it's called undressing intimacy, right? We want to get to a point where we get rid of all the things in between us, so
all
that
the
we
fears,
can be intimate.
all the vulnerabilities, all of the barriers, and create that trust and safety to fully undress.
All the clothes.
All the clothes. You love talking about getting naked.
Me? No, I would never imagine that.
But if you think about faith, or practicing your faith or spirituality, it really is about honestly being able to look at yourself and, in a way, sort of undressing, right, your weaknesses before God. And I think our intimacy asks us to undress before ourselves and our spouse, and to be willing to also face where we need to grow and develop, and to be willing to see that.
Absolutely. Well, we hope that some of these things have helped you.
Yes, we do.
Again, we would love it if you put some comments in there about what you think, and maybe help us to give us some ideas of what we can talk about next. But we'd also love if you liked and subscribed to this podcast, and then also come visit us on langfordlifecoaching.com.
You can get a free consult there. And what happens in a consult is really we take an inventory of where you're at in your relationship and figure out how we can best help you. And sometimes there's so many different tools and things that we can address, but often what we do is we meet with couples individually and then together and then individually together, because there's things to address individually as well as patterns that are happening between you as a couple. And so we like to take a look at all of those and give you individual support as well as couple support. And I think what's unique about that is most therapists will only meet with you as a couple or individually. And we really do individual and couples together. Yeah. And so we can address and speak to and strengthen you individually and also in your marriage.
Yeah. Love you to go visit us there. There's some resources there, some books, one called Replenish, which gives you a lot of good ideas of what you could do in this fantasy world. But come visit us on linkforlifecoaching.com. All right, babe, are you ready for the test?
I hope so.
Until next time.
Let's get undressed. No, keep undressing your intimacy.
Very good. All right, we'll talk to you later.
Bye-bye.